Hi, welcome to the TC. My name's David, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Apple Watch Ultra 2 after about a month of usage with it. So I do want to preface this with that this is my own kind of like opinion on the Apple Watch Ultra 2. After coming from an older series Apple Watch, I came from an Apple Watch Series 4, and it's only been about a month of usage with it. I do want you guys to be aware that, of course, this isn't like a full review. It's just like my kind of like initial thoughts after using the Apple Watch Ultra 2 for about a month. So do keep that in mind. I do plan on making another review about a year later just to see how the long-term usage with the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is. But for now, here's kind of like my initial thoughts and kind of like a pre-review before my more long-term reviews. So if you're also interested on the older Apple Watches, I do have the Series 4 review that I did on my previous review, and you can look at my channel for that. I'll also put it in the description below and probably in a card up here. But other than that, let's get into the review. So before I begin my entire spiel about the Apple Watch Ultra 2, I do want to split up this review into 4 sections like I do with my other reviews, so that if you guys are looking for a specific section, you guys can skip to that section. I'll put chapters down below in the description with the timestamps for it. So if you are looking for a specific section, you can go ahead and skip to that, or you can watch the whole review too. So the 4 different chapters that I'm going to be putting here are for the design and display, the performance and usability, the battery, and finally any kind of like special features to the Ultra 2 or features that I wanted to highlight about it. And the final overall thoughts about the Apple Watch Ultra 2. And yeah, just kind of a summary of everything that we cover. So yeah, if you're looking for a specific chapter, go ahead and skip down below, or you can just keep watching from here on. So for the design and display of the Apple Watch Ultra 2, it is basically exactly the same as the original Ultra 1. And really the only difference that you're going to be seeing is probably with the brightness of the display. So Apple says that it can reach up to 3,000 nits of peak brightness when you're in an outdoor setting. And yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement. It is probably the brightest display I've ever used. And when you're in direct sunlight, basically it's like you're reading on paper. Like, it is perfectly bright. You can see it perfectly. Even with polarized sunglasses, I have no issues with reading the display on my Apple Watch Ultra 2 in direct sunlight. It's probably one of the best displays I've ever used when it comes to readability in sunlight. And that being said, though, it is also the first display that Apple has that can go down to 1 nit on the watches. And for a lot of people, this has been an issue because in really dark environments, it likes to dim itself down to the 1 nit, and it can be a little bit difficult to see. For me personally, I haven't really noticed that being like a super big issue. Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit difficult to see at first, but I kind of adjusted to it. And one thing to note is that I do have night mode on the auto setting. So when it gets dark, it does go into that like red watch face setting. And it does like to go into that 1 nit setting. And honestly, it hasn't really been an issue for me, but I can see it being an issue for some people who have a hard time reading in, you know, dim environments, or maybe like their eyesight isn't as good. So do keep that in mind. But for me, it hasn't really been too much of an issue. In a way, it kind of does help the battery life too, though, because it's able to dim itself, you know, pretty down low. So it does help with that. But yeah, it can be an issue for some people, but it might just depend on your ability to see in dark environments too. Another thing with the Apple Watch Ultra is its actual overall design. So the Ultra 1 introduced this whole new rugged design for the Apple Watch, and it's basically carried over onto the Ultra 2. So you're basically getting the same exact design as we got last year with the original Ultra. The biggest difference to me is basically that display brightness. Like, literally, they're basically one-to-one identical. Even the etching on the backside of the Apple Watch Ultra and the Ultra 2 is exactly the same. They both literally say Apple Watch Ultra. There's no like Ultra 2 etching on the Ultra 2, which is a little bit unfortunate. You know, you'd think that how much you're spending that they would, you know, just put like Ultra 2 on there, but I guess that's too much to ask for. The only way that you're able to really discern the Ultra 1 and the Ultra 2 apart from each other is by the model number and serial numbers on the actual device itself, which is, it's hidden where the watch bands actually latch themselves. So if you are looking at something like the Ultra 1, Ultra 2, and you want to compare them, that would be the first place I would check. Other than that, the actual like settings app will tell you the model number, and from there you can see which model Apple Watch Ultra it is. Other than that though, the design of the Ultra and Ultra 2 are basically exactly the same, down to the titanium casing with the ceramic bottom case and the sapphire crystal display. And it is a 49mm display, which is the biggest display that Apple has for the Apple Watch. And when I originally got the Ultra, I thought that it might have been too big, but I tried one out at the store and I found it fit my wrist pretty much perfectly. I have a 180mm wrist, and you know, for some people it might be too big, but it's also going to come down to personal preference if you like a big watch or not. For me, I was coming from the 44mm Apple Watch Series 4, and yeah, it is a pretty big difference, but it's not as big of a difference that you might think it is. It does stick out from your wrist a bit more because it is quite a bit thicker than the regular series watches, but you get used to it pretty quickly, I'd say. Another thing that I want to point out is that the side of the Apple Watch does protrude a bit. It has a protection for the crown and side button, and as a result, you do get this kind of like unsightly bulge on the right side of the watch, well, depending on how you're wearing it on your wrist. But it does protect the crown, and it's kind of grown on me in a way. It's definitely one of the biggest differences from the actual like series Apple Watches, and it basically differentiates them. You know, like you can tell like this is an Apple Watch Ultra, it's not the regular series watches. Going off of that too, the actual bezel of the watch sticks out from the watch, and this is to protect the display. It actually is slightly lifted above the display. If you run a fingernail around the actual like bezel, you can feel it, but in overall usage, you're not really going to notice that. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice that it does have that protection, but do keep in mind that all the Apple Watch Ultras do come with a sapphire crystal display, which is one of the strongest displays that you can get for the Apple Watch. I think it is the strongest display you can get. So it's not really like prone to scratching, but sapphire crystal is more prone to shattering. However, I mean, if you're just using your watch for regular watch things, you're probably not going to notice that. But what's nice is that you don't get the micro scratches like the Apple Watch series watches that have the glass displays. So having the sapphire crystal is actually a really nice addition. If you go onto the other side of the watch, you do have the action button. And this is in what Apple calls international orange. And for a lot of people, it might be a bit too like bright, I guess. But there is like kits that you can buy that kind of cover it up with like a sticker. But for me, it's kind of grown on me too. Like you don't really notice it day to day, so it's not really a big issue to me. But for some people who are looking for a more understated watch, you might want to look into getting something covered, or maybe just a regular series watch. The speaker grills on the Apple Watch Ultra 2 and the regular Ultra are also quite a bit bigger than the regular series watches because it does have a 2-speaker array. Now the speakers on the actual Apple Watch Ultra get pretty loud, and of course you do have the siren feature, and it's about an 86 decibel siren, I believe. And yeah, it does get pretty loud. Fun fact actually, if you play the siren indoors, it's not as loud as when you play it outdoors. And this is because of the actual sound profile that Apple uses with the siren. It's meant to go further distances, not necessarily based on the actual loudness of it. So the actual like pattern of sound that Apple is using for the siren is perfect for actually being able to hear it from such a far distance. And I think that's one thing that a lot of reviewers don't really consider when they're looking at something like the siren. They just look at how loud it is, but loudness doesn't actually translate to the ability to reach further distances. It's actually the way that the sound is set up, which is actually pretty interesting to me. Another thing that I do want to highlight about the design and display of the Apple Watch Ultra is that every Apple Watch Ultra will come in the natural titanium. And for some people, that is kind of a make or break, because I know that there was a lot of people really anticipating a like darker black Apple Watch Ultra for the Ultra 2. And unfortunately, Apple didn't release a darker color, but you know, in my opinion, the natural titanium is a really actually kind of beautiful look for the Apple Watch Ultra, and it's kind of like the aluminum, but the difference is that it is a darker kind of color than like the silver, and it has a different sheen to it, but the pictures don't really do it justice in my opinion. You do have to see it in real life. Another really interesting thing is that I've noticed that the edges on the actual bezel are polished, and I didn't really notice this when I was looking at like the regular images online, but in person you can see just like how shiny they are, and it's kind of interesting. I'm like, why would Apple go through all the effort of polishing the bezels of the Ultra when they know that it's supposed to be a more like rugged watch? You'd think that those edges would get pretty scuffed up over time, but I guess based off of what most people's experience has been with the Ultra, even when they're using it for like pretty serious applications, it doesn't really seem to make a difference. So yeah, I guess it's a nice little design feature that they included, and it's still pretty rugged even with it. Now, of course, even though the display is 49 millimeters, it is a actually flat display versus something like you're getting with a Series 9, which has curved edges. But I do think that the display on the Apple Watch Ultra and Ultra 2 is actually a lot more usable than what you're getting with the regular series watches because it's flat. You do get the actual surface of the watch display as your full display. So with the regular series watches, it does go onto the edges, and as a result, you kind of do lose some screen real estate. But with the Apple Watch Ultra, you get the full display. And I think that's really cool. You know, like even though the bezels aren't quite as thin as you're getting with the newer series Apple Watches, it's still perfect in my opinion. Like it's not too thick and it's not too thin. Like if they stretched it out all the way to the edges, I feel like this watch would seem really, really big. As it is right now, I think it's actually like the perfect size. I wish Apple actually made a regular series watch in this kind of size, because I feel like that would sell really well, but I guess they want you to get an Ultra. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the performance and usability of the Ultra 2. Now the Ultra 2 has the same exact SIP as the Apple Watch Series 9, that being the S9 SIP. And one of the biggest features of the S9 is that it does have more neural engine cores than the Apple Watch Series 8 and the original Ultra. As a result, you're able to get on-device Siri, and yeah, I mean, Siri is a lot quicker on this device than it's ever been in pretty much any of my devices other than like maybe my phone. When you're asking Siri basic requests like setting a timer or turning on an alarm, she's basically instant. There's no wait. Even if you're using stuff that requires an internet connection, Siri is still pretty quick. Like if I ask her the weather for the next 10 days, she'll give me a result pretty much immediately. And I think that's really cool because if you compare it to something like the older Apple Watches, it does take a lot more time for those watches to actually finish your request, but on this watch, it's pretty much instant. It's like using your phone. So I do think that those neural engine cores really made a big difference. However, you do also kind of have a trade-off with that. Of course, you're going to be using more power for that, but luckily the S9 SIP does have more efficiency cores, and it's also a lot more efficient than the original Series 8 and older Apple Watches. As a result, for the Ultra 2, you're able to get up to 72 hours on low power mode, and that's what Apple says, but in my experience, it's actually been quite a bit longer. So even when you're on just like a normal use case with it, I've noticed that the battery does last quite a bit longer than what Apple advertises. I think Apple was basically underestimating their battery. So when people got the actual Apple Watch Ultra, they're going to notice like, wow, it's actually quite a bit longer than what they're advertising. Unless you're doing some like major workouts that require heart tracking 24/7, you're basically going to have a pretty hard time killing this battery in one day, maybe even 2 days. In my use case, even with about an hour workout each day, and with sleep tracking, and with the always on display on, I've gotten around 3 days to 2 days of usage with my Apple Watch Ultra. And Apple estimates around 36 hours of actual battery life on the normal use cases, but honestly, you can probably squeeze out about 48 plus hours on the Apple Watch Ultra in its regular settings, not turning off any of the specific features that it has, which is really cool in my opinion, because like coming from a Series 4 that had degraded battery health, and also if you consider that like watchOS 10 had the really big battery issue, but now it's kind of fixed, but it actually hasn't really fixed it, but yeah, we'll just gloss over that. The Ultra 2 is probably the longest lasting smartwatch I've owned. Of course, if you're comparing it to something like a Garmin that's dedicated for this stuff, that has like the solar charging or whatever, it's not as long as that. It will never be as long as that. But for an Apple Watch, this is probably the best battery life that you're ever going to get. Of course, we don't know what all the newer Apple Watches are going to be like, but for this time right now, the Ultra 2 is probably one of the best battery life that Apple has on their Apple Watch series lines. And kind of glossing over the performance and usability there for a second, the actual performance of the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is perfect. It's, there's nothing to complain about. It's fast, it's fluid. Even on watchOS 10, there's no stuttering, there's nothing. It's basically the perfect experience that you can get right now on an Apple Watch. And yeah, that makes sense. It's a brand new Apple Watch. It has a brand new chip, so of course it's going to be perfect. And it's running basically its original software. Over time, of course, this might change, but as it is right now, the Apple Watch doesn't really require that much power because it's just an Apple Watch, So I think that the Apple Watch Ultra 2 will age pretty well in that regard in terms of actual performance and usability, just because the Apple Watch doesn't really need that much performance to do Apple Watch things. So yeah, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is a fast watch. It's got the on-device Siri, which is much faster. And of course, you do get the efficiency cores as well, which does make battery life a lot better. And speaking of battery life, let's go ahead into the next chapter for the actual battery of the Apple Watch Ultra. Of course, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 does get up to 72 hours on low power mode, according to Apple. But in my use case, even on normal mode, I can almost get to 72 hours. I haven't actually killed this watch, but what I typically do with my Apple Watch Ultra 2 is I'll wear it for 2 nights in a row. And basically by the 3rd day, I'm around 30%. And this is with my always on display on, and with all the health tracking features on, and even with a workout for each day. So yeah, I don't think you're going to have any issues with the battery life of the Ultra 2, and probably not with the Ultra 1 as well. They're probably going to be like basically neck and neck. I know there's some people doing comparisons. I don't have an Ultra 1, unfortunately, to compare it to, but in my experience with the Ultra 2, it's been perfect. I haven't had any issues with battery life at all. And of course, if you need to extend the battery life, there is low power mode, but keep in mind that it will turn off the always on display, so you do need to use the raise to wake to be able to see the actual display of the watch on low power mode. Other than that though, the battery life on the Apple Watch Ultra 2 has been great. I have no complaints there, and I guess we're just gonna have to see how it ages, but because it is such a big battery, I do think that it will age pretty well. So the final chapter that I want to cover is kind of like the special features and different like things I want to highlight about the Apple Watch Ultra 2. And of course, being that it is an Apple Watch Ultra, one of the first things I want to highlight is actually the bands. With the Ultra series, you get a choice of 3 different bands when you're buying a brand new. You can either choose from the Alpine Loop, the Trail Loop, or the Ocean Loop. So I went with the Alpine Loop in the indigo color because I wanted something that I didn't really have, and purple's kind of cool, right? The other colors that they have for the Ultra 2 is the blue Alpine Loop and the olive Alpine Loop. In person, the blue one's really nice, but I just wanted to have something a little bit different too, I don't really see anyone choosing the indigo loop that much, so yeah, that's why I went with indigo. It's a really nice color, actually. And if you look at like the fakes online, they're not going to be like anywhere near the actual like purple that Apple's made here for the indigo loop. It's kind of like weird because like in a dark environment, it does have like a kind of black look to it. It's probably one of the closest colors you can get to black. But yeah, I do actually really like the indigo loop. And I think if you're looking for an Alpine loop, do check out the indigo color because it is actually a pretty nice color. That being said too, there is other bands that they have for the Apple Watch Ultra. The Trail Loop is a more like hook and loop style, so if you compare it to something like the Apple Watch Sport Loops, those are like the Velcro kind of attaching Apple Watch bands, but the difference with the Trail Loop is that it's actually quite a bit thinner and the material softer, and there's more like area for the actual Velcro parts. So with that, for a lot of people, it's probably one of the most comfortable bands that they have. But since I own a lot of sport loops, that's why I didn't go with the Trail Loop. And yeah, other than that, the Ocean Loop is also another option. It's made out of the same material that they use for the regular sport loops, but it has like a enclosure that's like a hook that allows you to basically really get it, to where it's not going to come off of you. It's kind of similar in a way to the Alpine Loop where it has that hook. And, I think it's probably one of the more secure bands to be wearing too. And of course it is waterproof, and it's a lot better for wearing in cases where you're going to be going into water. And of course they do have like the extension for the scuba diving. But yeah, there is 3 different options for the Ultra, and basically you can choose whatever option you think is going to fit you the best. For me, I went with the Alpine loop because I wanted something that was kind of cool, and also liked the fact that it is different from like the sport loops that I have. And yeah, I think it's actually quite comfortable too, which is actually surprising. What you don't really get from the online photos, that it's actually quite stretchy. And because of that stretch, you can get a pretty comfortable fit with the Alpine loop. So if you are looking at the Alpine loop, don't be afraid to like go to the store and try one on, because it actually is way more comfortable than you might think. Another feature with the Ultra 2 and the Series 9 that the new Apple Watch chip allowed you to do is of course the new double tap feature. With the double tap feature, some like select areas on the Apple Watch allow you to use it. And like for instance, if you get a notification and you use the double tap, you can use it to dismiss a notification or to snooze a notification. Or if you're just on the regular home screen and you're double tapping, you can go through your widgets. For me, I've used double tap to clear out notifications a lot, but other than that, I haven't really had like a specific use case where I was like, wow, this is great. I honestly think it was kind of just a gimmick for Apple to put in, especially since you can use the different accessibility modes on the older Apple Watches to get something kind of similar to it. But yeah, I mean, don't go out of your way to buy like an Ultra 2 or Series 9 just for the double tap feature. It's not worth it. But it is just kind of like a nice extra feature that you're getting going to a newer Apple Watch. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily look to get a new Apple Watch just because it has double tap. Another thing that you're getting with the Ultra Apple Watches is the special faces for it. Of course, you have the Wayfinder face, which is like the original Apple Watch Ultra face, and then now you have the Modular Ultra, which allows basically like 8 or 9 different complications all at once. And yeah, it's actually one of my favorite faces. I was originally using the infographic face on my Series 4 because it had so much information on it. But with this new Modular Ultra face, it's become my new favorite. You can get so many different complications on it, and yeah, I mean, of course, it looks a little like funny. It's not really classy. Kind of looks like I'm wearing a Pip-Boy on my wrist, but you know, I bought the Ultra so I can get basically the best experience that I want out of my watch, not for other people to tell me, oh, you shouldn't have that face, you know? If you want a more classy Apple Watch, you can look towards the regular series watches, or like the stainless steel Apple Watch Series 9. Those, of course, are a lot more classy, but for me, I wanted the more rugged look, and I really like the way that the Ultra 2 looks, and basically the Ultra. Of course, another thing that I wanted to mention with the Ultra 2 is that you do get all the same great health features that the original Ultra had, such as the ECG, the blood oxygen sensor, and the temperature sensor. And of course, you do get the ability to see like your elevation and, you know, all that kind of stuff, into the compass and all that. But the one thing I do like about the Ultra 2 is that the temperature sensor actually works pretty well, especially for sleep tracking. So recently I was actually pretty sick, and I saw that my baseline temperature was, you know, it's around like 95, I want to say. That's what the watch tells me. But when I got sick, it went up by over 3 degrees. So I was able to see like, hey, you know, I actually am running a fever here, you know, because like, obviously your baseline temperature is coming from your wrist, so that's not like your temperature on your forehead. So having that like ability to see like, okay, that's the difference in my temperature from like a normal night to a night where I'm actually sick. That's really cool, and having that ability on this watch is really awesome. Of course, that's another feature that you get with the Series 8 and the Ultra 1, but just having that feature on here, that's actually really cool, especially coming from the Series 4. Of course, you do get the blood oxygen sensor as well, and taking a blood oxygen reading is actually not too hard. You just have to open the app and press start and make sure your wrist is pretty still. I'm kind of floating my wrist, so it's probably going to give me an accurate reading, but let's just see what it says. 96%. So I'd say that's about normal. It's not too bad. Of course, you also get the ability to do an ECG. That's another thing I did too when I was feeling sick. I did an ECG just to see, you know, like, what's the difference? And yeah, I did have a pretty abnormal ECG. I was having the chills, so of course my ECG wasn't like completely accurate, but you know, it's just seeing that it was pretty cool just to see like, oh yeah, there's a pretty big difference between a normal ECG and what's going on with me right now. So if we open the ECG app, it's just like the Series 4, the one I reviewed in my previous video. So you just open the ECG app, put your finger on the crown, and you're able to take an ECG. Takes about 30 seconds, but overall it's not too bad. My ECG reading is a little bit weird right now because my arm is actually above and it's at a weird position because I'm trying to record it, but other than that, for the most part, it should end up being a pretty normal reading. Yeah, see, it's a regular reading. And you can put like symptoms if you're not feeling well, and the watch will tell you like, hey, this is a serious symptom, you might want to get checked out. And yeah, of course you also get features like the fall detection that you got with this Series 4. And yeah, I mean, it's just a great watch when it comes to health features and kind of just like overall features as a package. So one other thing that I wanted to highlight with the Apple Watch Ultra line is actually the box. And what's really cool with the box is that if you want to tell an Ultra 2 from an Ultra 1, on the edge of the box you might have a carbon neutral actual logo here. And this is going to be on any Ultra 2 that has the Alpine loop or the Trail loop. It won't be on the ones that have the Ocean loop because they couldn't make those in a carbon neutral way just because of the material. But with the Alpine and the Trail loop, the fabric material, you are able to get it with the carbon neutral like package, I guess. So that's an easy way to figure out if it's an Ultra 2. And of course, on the back, you're going to have things like, you know, they'll tell you this is an Ultra 2 here. Can't get it to focus, but it'll say Apple Watch Ultra 2, 49mm titanium, and then it'll have which loop or band that you got. And it'll have the model number right there as well. So yeah, if you do want to check out if it's a real Apple Watch Ultra, you can look on the back. And of course, do remember that the carbon neutral sticker is there. And yeah. The other really cool thing with all of the Apple Watch Ultra packages, even if you have an Ultra 1, of course, when you open it, it's actually like a full experience. So let's go ahead and open one up for now. And yeah, since I got the Alpine loop, I do get this like mountainous kind of picture with the box. And yeah, you get like the actual like booklet for it. This has the watch, and of course the Boxer band. So if I put this aside real quick, we can take a look at the booklet that they give you. And basically it's kind of like your startup book, but it also shows you the different kinds of bands that they have. This is the Alpine loop, the Ocean loop, and the Trail loop. This is the one that Apple's using for their advertising for the Ultra 2. I liked it in person, but my only thing is like it's too similar to a sport loop I have, so that's why I wanted the Alpine loop. And basically it's like a little startup guide. Tells you everything you need to know about it. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't think Apple has like any other kind of booklet like this for the Apple Watches, so this is kind of a cool little thing. And yeah, there's your just like paperwork for it. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Another thing to keep in mind as well, if you're looking at the different Apple Watches, on the different bands, you're going to have a different actual box inside. So the Trail loop has like an actual trail, and the Ocean loop is like waves crashing, which is a pretty like neat touch, I think. And yeah, it's just a little like kind of Easter egg that I wanted to share with you guys. And yeah, that's the box of the Apple Watch Ultra 2. And yeah, I mean, basically, that's all you need to know about the Ultra 2. It's a minor upgrade over the original Ultra, but for anyone coming from a regular Apple Watch series, or an older one specifically, it's quite a big jump in my opinion. And the one thing that you're really going to like, of course, is that battery life. The battery is probably the best part of this watch and was one of the main reasons I upgraded from the Series 4. I was originally looking at the Series 9, but knowing that I'm probably going to be keeping my watch for the next like 5 or 6 years, I wanted the best battery life I could get. So when the battery health does degrade, I know that it's still going to get me through my day, you know? So yeah, overall, I do think that the Ultra 2 is a pretty worthy watch. If you're looking for an Ultra, do keep in mind that the first generation is probably still a great watch as well. There's not that many changes, the main differences being, of course, the chip, and we don't know how that's going to age in difference in the next like 6 years, but it's an Apple Watch. Why do you need like the fastest thing ever, right? For me, I just wanted to get an Ultra 2 just because I want that longevity and knowing that I'm going to have a brand new watch, you know? But yeah, overall, I do think that the Ultra 2 is a pretty great watch. And if you are looking to get one, you're probably not going to have any complaints about it. If you do decide to go the secondhand route, do keep in mind that you should check out the model numbers of the watches and the serial numbers, and be careful for a lot of scammers online. They're going to be using like fake Apple Watches a lot of the time. So do keep in mind that if you are planning on buying an Apple Watch used, you should try to go in person and try pairing it with your phone before actually paying, just to make sure it is a legitimate Apple Watches. A lot of these scams online are using real serial numbers on fake watches. So you think that you're getting a real watch, but when you go to pair it, it doesn't want to pair with your iPhone. So yeah, be careful with scammers. If the deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. And even with the like used market, you can probably still find a brand new Apple Watch Ultra, like the original Ultra, for a pretty steep discount. I know that some stores were offering it for about $600, but it might go down even more for Black Friday, so do keep that in mind. And we do have the holidays coming up, so it might also change the price even further. I know they have some Series 9 deals as well, if you're looking for a more traditional Apple Watch design. So overall, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is a pretty great watch. It is a big watch, but it's still manageable in my opinion, and if you're looking at the Apple Watch Ultra, you're probably going to not mind the fact that it is a pretty big watch. It has pretty stellar battery life, the display is great and it's nice and bright, and the performance of it is pretty much amazing. So yeah, I have really no complaints about the Apple Watch Ultra and my specific Ultra 2. And if you are looking for one, I think it's a pretty great deal. Even if you're the type who's not going to be using every single feature of the Ultra, you're still going to get a pretty great Apple Watch experience, and probably one of the best experiences that you can get with the Apple Watch. So overall, I would definitely consider looking at the Apple Watch Ultra or the Ultra 2. And if you're coming from an older Apple Watch, do consider that, you know, if you're planning on keeping your watch for a long time, just probably get the best that you can get, right? So yeah, that's going to be it for today's review. If you liked what you saw, consider subscribing to see more content just like this. And if you guys have any questions about the Ultra 2, do leave a comment down below and I'll try to answer every single question that you guys have. And yeah, check out the description for the chapters as well as any other links that I may have. I'll have the Series 4 review in the description below as well if you want to check that out. And yeah, I think that's everything. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.